So welcome everybody that's watching. I can't see any faces, which is, I guess, the norm with these things. But I feel really honoured and privileged to be part of this and to kind of lead you through these questions, exploring what it is, what the book's been about, the journey for yourselves, etc. I think it's a real key book for me, being a psychotherapist and a musician. I think it's about time somebody kind of took the bull by the horns and wrote something like this. So, you know, again, I feel really honoured to be a participant, I guess, in the gathering of the data or the research, and to be allowed to have seen the drafts, various ones that were coming through. So I thank you both personally for that aspect of it. And also think it's a really important perspective, the way you've multi-lensed the discourse in the industry from, I guess there's some academia in there, there's some perspectives of musicians, both professional and maybe at a different level, and the industrial element. So on that part, I'd like to thank you both personally. And getting on with it, maybe you could both introduce yourselves. I'm sure maybe some of the people watching this already know you, but it'd be interesting to just get some background from you both. Maybe Lucy, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, Adam, firstly, thank you so much for that incredibly kind introduction. Thank you so much to everybody who's watching. This is just such a huge dream come true for Rhian and myself. It's been a professional dream for both of us for a long time, and actually it's been a huge amount of work in the making, as I'm sure many of you will know. And thank you so much to Adam for contributing and for reading the early edits. We were incredibly grateful to have so many people, professionals like Adam, to read the early chapters that we wrote to make sure that they were actually very sound from a health and physical health and mental health perspective. So that was one of the reasons why it was such a huge undertaking. We always wanted to check that everything was as it should be. But I am a PhD researcher and musician and a vocal and performance coach. And I also do a lot of work with various charities, and I have a podcast on the health and wellbeing of artists too, called Elevate Music, in partnership with Help Musicians. So welcome everybody, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to discussing more in a minute.
So I'm Rhian, co-author of Sound Advice alongside Lucy, and I'm primarily a music business journalist. So that's where I started my career, which was at Music Week, trade magazine in the UK. It was about almost 10 years ago now, I think, 8 to 10 years ago, that I started writing about the music business. And I stayed there for 3 years, and then I've been freelance now for the majority of my career. And today I write for trade titles like Music Business Worldwide and a US publication called Hits Daily Double. And I also write regularly for The Guardian and anyone else who will have me, really.
Thank you. Rhian, a question for you. I know you're a big Amy Winehouse fan. How did her journey and her music, or who she was as a person, influence your book, or did it?
So I became interested in the music and mental health conversation specifically about 6 years ago now. There was a lot of conversation in the industry about it, which was pegged onto the Amy Winehouse story and how devastating that was for a lot of people. And the Amy documentary was released, and that was obviously a really tough watch. And it left me with a lot of questions because I loved her obviously as a music fan and her as a person. And I remember even writing, like in my student journalism days, about the way that she was mistreated by the media and how her mental health issues were sensationalized, and the language that was used around that sort of stuff was extremely damaging. And that just really upset me and just struck me as something that was extremely wrong. So that sort of was where perhaps my interest was piqued. And then, yeah, so the Amy documentary was released, and I wrote a couple of articles questioning what support there was for artists in the music business from a health perspective, and found out that there wasn't really much at the time, which is definitely changing now. And our book is in very small part testament to that, because we've had a lot of support across the industry for writing it. So yeah, that's sort of where it all started for me. But I also, like a lot of musicians, are in my family, and I was in like a music fan crowd at school and had a lot of musician friends and went to music college. So just like empathy and understanding, I think, for the plight of a musician is something that just comes quite naturally to me as well, which again kind of furthers my interest in this particular area.
Yeah, so a real personal and emotional, I guess, aesthetic involvement with seeing this through and, you know, facilitating change, hopefully.
Yeah.
How about you, Lucy? I know it's obviously an important book. What's your personal take on that? And especially now, I guess, during these, you know, turbulent times that musicians find themselves in.
Well, I think, as you mentioned before, Adam, the industry hasn't yet had a central resource where musicians can go to actually get all the information they need. So, you know, in the past, there has been a conversation about mental health, but we haven't had so much of a conversation about the physical health issues, for example, that musicians face. And as someone who really struggled with hypermobility as a musician and the pain that that actually caused, it was really important to me that the information got out to musicians about the problems musicians face. I mean, they're incredibly prevalent. Research suggests that 74% of musicians experience a musculoskeletal issue when they play, which is going to have a huge impact on their ability to perform. So it was a real dream to create, well, I really hoped that we could create a central resource where people could go for the information and awareness about the problems they might face. And then also there would be self-help management tips. So for things that weren't too complicated, they could find out how to prevent issues or how to sort them themselves. And then also signposting to the absolute experts in the field. And this is something that I think we really struggle with in the music community, is actually making sure that we get to the health experts who know exactly what the issues are for musicians experiencing that problem. I mean, if we take vocal health, for example, if any musician or singer develops a vocal health issue, it's so important that they actually get to be seen by a voice clinic that works with professional voice users, for example. So in the book, we made sure that we spoke to vocal rehabilitation coaches, and we've signposted to the various pathways that exist for singers who have vocal health issues, such as through BAPAM, the British Association of Performing Arts Medicine. So, for example, if you have a health issue, if you go to BAPAM, they will give you a letter that you can take to your GP, making sure that your GP doesn't just put you through the run-of-the-mill voice clinic, which isn't necessarily going to help sort your problem out. And also people don't understand how important those issues are for musicians. You know, it's their job, it's their identity. They need to get back working as soon as possible, and they can't be put on a 6-month waiting list. So all these factors were incredibly important to me to put into the book. But also, obviously, when we started writing this book, we had no idea about what was ahead in terms of COVID. And I think we'd probably written about maybe a quarter of the book by the time the pandemic actually hit. And it was quite difficult to work out to what extent we actually included COVID in the book at that point, because we had no idea what the impact was going to be. So we reference it in not greatly, but in a very small way at various times. But we decided to stick to the core content of what the problematic issues that musicians face are. But I think now, if we look at the situation that we're in, so we've had a year where a lot of musicians haven't been performing, a lot of them haven't really been practicing, and there's a lot of anxiety about that return to performance. So what's fantastic is the book has a section on managing performance anxiety, which I think will be really helpful for people who've never come across strategies that can help before. We've got things like effective practice. So one of the issues that musicians face is a really key time when they're more susceptible to injury is when practice time suddenly goes up. So for example, if a musician was to suddenly get into the studio and practice 6 hours a day, having not practiced over the last year, they're more susceptible to musculoskeletal injuries. So we've got a section on how to plan and practice effectively, how long is an ideal amount to practice, and also we've got goal setting chapters, so how to plan for your return back to work. And also I think there's still time, people are still not working and able to perform, and this period has given people a really great time to reflect on maybe some of the things they did in the past, different ways they might want to work in the future, and maybe looking at things like touring. How can they actually plan to have a healthier tour in the future? And we cover all of that in our touring chapter too.
Thank you. Lots there. And Rhian, I'm just aware that, you know, you were speaking earlier about coming into your involvement with music from a fan perspective, and, you know, really getting into music and being around musicians. And I'm sure, you know, along with myself and Lucy, we've seen this huge cultural shift into the digitalization of music and what's happened. I wonder how you worked through that regarding the book, and does the book contain anything around this kind of modern dilemma?
We have a chapter on social media, which is probably one of the longest chapters in the book, so that's pretty robust. Towards the end of the book, we also cover a little bit about streaming and how difficult it is to make money from that, and therefore how important it is for, you know, people like yourselves, and you're actually quoted on that bit in that bit, to have portfolio careers where you might have a part-time job, or you might just earn your money from various different facets of your career. So I think that's kind of covers all the digital aspect. I can't think of anything else. I mean, the other thing that definitely pertains to that is that we've got a criticism and opinions chapter. Artists obviously these days have direct access to fans who say lovely things, but then they also have access to trolls and critics who are strangers and can just say whatever they want on the internet, and they can receive that directly if they don't have someone else managing their channels. That's obviously quite difficult to deal with. And yeah, like I said, we have a whole chapter on that. And for people who haven't yet bought the book, that's going to be previewed via the Line of Best Fit soon, so you'll be able to read it online to get a bit of the flavour of what's inside the book.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm always really interested in people's perspectives on social media, and I guess from the digitalisation of the music industry, it's two sides. It is this social media and the pressures, but it's also the way it's consumed now. I guess in terms of, in the old days, you know, you'd release a record or whatever it was, physical artifact, and you go out and tour. And now it's very different, you know, from revenue streams that we've all been made aware of, and the whole Spotify debate, and alongside that, the social media area. I wonder if you can tell me anything about your view on maybe the way the industry also is shaped in terms of the way people release records, the way that the speed at which they're releasing records, and the lack of financial income coming from it now.
Yeah, so that kind of relates to, I guess, the specific health pressures that come about as a result of this new age that we're living in. And there's a lot less money in the industry. I actually looked up some stats before this just to clarify it. And in 1999, in the CD age, the global music business was worth $39 billion. In cash terms now, that's worth $60 billion. And in 2019, the global music industry was worth $20.2 billion. So that's a huge reduction. And what that results in, I think, from what I've seen, is a lot of pressure on artists to release music relentlessly. Like, you know, the 2, 3, 4, 5 year break between albums is a rarity really these days. And for those releases to be successful and to cut through not only the wealth of musician competition there is out there, but also other entertainment competition like, you know, Netflix and everything else that everyone can access on the internet. It's very tough to get heard nowadays. And I think as a result of that, that also brings about a focus on touring. So artists are perhaps touring more than they ever did, and the touring lifestyle is particularly tough. And it's especially tough if you don't have adequate breaks in between tours and also in between shows. And if people are focusing so much on the bottom line, then artists are going to get burnt out on the road. And that's something that we definitely came across a lot while researching the book. And yeah, something we cover quite extensively in the touring chapter and also in a separate section on burnout.
Yeah, that's something I particularly took from the book, that, you know, I still view it as a bit of a transitional space, because the speed at which technology is moving, we all have to adapt very quickly. And I think what I took from the book was it does give kind of a holding to that and give like an infrastructure in place and some information about what's going on, which I think is really helpful in that sense. So it's interesting to hear your take on that. Lucy, obviously I think we first became acquainted through your own PhD research. How did that influence your approach to the book? And I'm also interested, how did you manage to get this real rich balance between, you know, some of the academic stuff that you've been using and engaging with, and I guess having some more of that more popular cultural aspect of that to really come across in the cohesive way it does?
Yeah, thank you for saying that. So I started off my career in management, and I spent about 10 years in the business side of music whilst also being a musician. I then decided to actually become a vocal coach full time and move away from the business side of things. But I really felt that experience in the music industry, and I did a lot of touring. I was a tour manager for a while, so I really saw what it was like on the road. And from a very early age, I think as a musician, I always thought it would be amazing to be on the road and have my own tour or whatever. And then as soon as I actually saw the pressures that artists were under, and, you know, we were getting up at 6 a.m. sometimes to do radio promo tours, and, you know, events would go on late into the night. I mean, it was grueling. And so from an early age, really, within the music industry, I just thought these artists need support. And in those days, I had no idea how I could support them. So it's been a very, very long journey, really, from identifying an issue quite early on. This is probably around 2003. And then when I became a vocal coach, I wanted to be able to support musicians more widely with their health issues, especially performance anxiety. For a singer, you know, if you're a vocal coach and you can teach people the best techniques in the world, but if they are really nervous, it all falls apart. So it started a journey of returning to academia with an MSc and learning all about all the issues that musicians face. And then I wanted to continue that with my PhD research, but I've been working with some really great artists over the last 5-10 years. And I really tried to make sure that the research that I do is rooted in the real world. So I actually take inspiration from the artists I work with and the experiences I have with them on tour. And then also when I'm doing my research, and also the other way around. So the things I find in my research, I try to incorporate in my coaching practice. But in terms of the PhD, the literature, for anyone who's done a PhD, or Adam, as you know, you have to write a very extensive literature review. And this is where you basically read everything that's ever been written in an academic context about the topic that you're interested in. And it's a pretty full-on experience, but it does mean that at the other end of it, you have a really, really strong idea of what the main issues are, you know, both the physical and mental issues and the environmental issues and the contexts and challenges that musicians face. So the literature review itself really, really informed, for me, the topics that I brought to Rhian and said, I think we really need these in the book. But then on top of that, I had conducted my own research project. And within that, one of the really key things that came up, there were two really main things that stuck out for me. One was that musicians didn't feel supported with their health issues, and they didn't know where to go for support, which was quite surprising at the time because there were charities out there, but it was a case of that message not reaching the musicians who need it. And the second thing was they didn't feel equipped with the skills to do the job that they had to do. So I spoke to, for example, a really prominent singer who was doing stadiums, and she'd come up from quite a young age. She was signed at quite a young age. And she'd never been taught how to warm up her voice. And she would get incredibly nervous, and nobody was there to help her with performance anxiety strategies. And so it was hearing these stories from artists and also from my own experience. But I didn't want, you know, as a coach, I didn't want the book to just be based on my experience. I wanted to make sure we could replicate that wider. So that research project really gave me a good solid grounding of the fact that we needed to, not only did we need to let musicians know about the health issues they might face, but we also needed to tell them things like how to manage that performance anxiety, and how to cope with being on stage, how to improve confidence on stage. There's so much research about things like pre-performance routines, post-performance reviews, all kinds of ways of actually helping people with the performance experience, which again just doesn't really seem to get out to musicians. Adam, as you know, as a musician who's had that experience in a huge venue, can you tell us what it's like?
To perform in a huge venue?
Yeah, I mean, is it yeah? How does it feel? I mean, did you feel prepared for it?
No. I mean, I guess I used my own coping mechanisms, which were maybe less than healthy at the time. But I think it is daunting, and I think the amount of preparation we had anyway. I think genre specific wise, maybe in the classical domain in conservatoire, you are forearmed, but coming from a band demographic, it's kind of thrown in by hook or by crook and try and work out the best way personally. Lots of maladaptive strategies I use, which since I've develop more healthy ones, etc. But it's daunting, and you're right. And when I read the book, I took away some of the information about maybe some stuff I can try. I mean, even performing now, I mean, not now because of COVID, but going forward, still struggling with some of that anxiety and those nerves. And it's great on the other side of the performance, but the hours before, sometimes it can just push me away from even wanting to do it. So I think some of the strategies and the scaffolding in the book, I'm without doubt going to be using.
It's interesting you mention the preparation process in conservatoires, because I also think there's quite a lot we can learn, and I did take some inspiration from that process for the book. So there's so much research about the issues that classical musicians face and how to support them, what really works, but we don't have that research in pop. But one of the things, for example, in conservatoires is that they do extensive health and wellbeing programs where they actually educate the musicians about the potential issues they're going to face, and everything from life skills to how to manage stress, how to do time management, all kinds of things. I would love to see that across the board more widely, and I hope that we have done, taken a small step in trying to actually create that kind of structure and that kind of program of the information that they need for pop musicians.
Yeah, and I think the formal artifact of a book is an amazing resource for that. And I think because it's been published and it is this physical element, I think with the nature of information it is as it is now, there's so much of it, it's easy to get lost and bewildered. And again, this is why I was struck by what is needed was almost like the manualized aspect of what is contained within what you've both delivered, which I guess brings me on to the next part of it. Is I was really interested in the nuts and the bolts of a product, as it were. And I wonder if you can tell me, either of you, about something about the process of actually the idea and the concept and seeing that fulfilled, behind you here and in front of you there, Rhian, there's these books. And what was the process like? Did you get it published? Did you want to self-publish? How did you get the funders?
It was a very long process that went on for about 2 years. But it was just complete trial and error the entire time and following instinct. Thankfully, me and Lucy met, and when we met, we both realized that we'd had the same idea, and we're both totally up for working on it together. And thankfully, we've worked really well together, I think. So that's been a great aspect of it. And at first, we definitely were going the publisher route, and we pulled together a book proposal and we pitched it to very few, literally 1 or 2 or something. And, we kind of got nothing, or got we'll look at it. And then they didn't look at it. And I don't know, I think, and I don't know if Lucy would share this, but as a self-employed person, I'm just used to just getting things done myself. So we didn't want to wait around for someone to give us a yes, and that could be 6 months down the line when we could actually just be getting on and writing it. And we knew the music industry needed this resource, and we knew that there was a lot of conversations that were happening at various companies about how to better support artists, and it's kind of a no-brainer from a funding perspective. That's what we thought, let's try all these companies and see if they'll fund us to write it. And if they do that, then we don't need a publisher, because that means we can fund the self-publishing process. So that's what we did. We went to Universal, Sony, Warner, Live Nation, PRS, PPL, lots of others, and held meetings and, proposed the idea. And brilliantly, the majority of them, I think, were on board from the very beginning and kind of didn't really ask many questions and just let us get on with it, and also didn't have any editorial control, which has been amazing. So we're really grateful for that. And, you know, if you want to find out more about who funded us, they're all name checked at the beginning of the book and also on our website. So that was amazing. And then, so once we started getting the funding in, and before that, we just started writing it. And that was a very, again, trial and error process. You know, me and Lucy mocked up a list of 10 chapters, which have turned into 20. And we modified along the way, scrapped some, melded some together. And then our editors, one of whom is Pop Justice founder Peter Robinson, and the other is Gareth Dillon Smith, who's a really respected academic and musician. So they both have really complementary skills. Came in and did their edits, made it brilliant. And me and Lucy did more edits, and then people like yourself read various chapters and gave us in more input and, you know, checked that we got everything right. And I'm so glad we did that process, because we just had like such helpful feedback, some of which also was yours during that time. And we added more quotes and just made sure that everything was sound, because health can be a very tricky subject to write about. And we just want to make sure that all of that was correct. And we weren't trying to, I don't know, act as if we were like prescribing something while not being health professionals ourselves. So yeah, there was definitely a point where I went back to publishers and agents and, you know, pitched lots and lots, because we were like, it would be good to get the publishing process get taken off our hands, because that's obviously a whole other job. But again, didn't get anywhere with that. And that to me was just frustrating, because it's like, this is such a good idea. We know this is a brilliant idea. Like, and okay, we don't want anything to do with you if you're not on board, because lots of people are and we believe in it. So then we just carried on self-publishing, and that's been a hugely interesting learning process that's been stressful, but we've got a great distributor called Matador, and they've answered about 1,000 questions from us at this point, and they were really helpful, holding our hand throughout the whole process. We found amazing front cover designers, we found an amazing designer for the interior of the book, we found an amazing illustrator, we've got great marketing and press people as well, and all of those people just helped pull it together for us.
Fantastic. And I know you write a lot for different publications, and I wondered how that was different compared to writing this and compiling it, and did you have to lean out or lean into certain skill sets you use for writing for those publications?
Well, it took a lot longer, because an article doesn't take me 2 years, thankfully. I mean, the way that I wrote the chapters was sort of the way that I would approach writing a feature. Obviously, it's different when there's a co-author involved, because I'll write it, I'll send it to Lucy, she'll check it, come back with some feedback, I'll rewrite it, and vice versa. So that was different. And, you know, I've had to be more of an editor also during this process than I usually am, because usually the only work that I'm editing is my own. And I mean, I've never raised money before. I've never gone to people and asked for money. That was quite interesting and sometimes uncomfortable. But again, very encouraging, because everyone said yes, and they were so positive from the beginning. And so that was a big confidence boost. They trusted us both to do it. And I mean, self-publishing is a completely new world entirely. And yeah, I would quite like to write books in future, and I'm not sure if I would go down the self-publishing route again for the immediate time, because it would just be nice to kind of get that taken off my hands in future, because it's just a lot of things to think about. But it's also really satisfying. You know, me and Lucy both got our books delivered today, and we're like holding these things on our hands that we like had a hand in making every aspect of. So that's amazing. That's like an amazing achievement that I think that we're both really proud of. So, you know, swings and roundabouts, like life.
Yeah, fantastic. I can't wait to get a physical copy.
You should get it next week.
Right, great stuff. Lucy, I wanted to ask you also that you briefly mentioned previously about it was important to have that exploration of people's experiences, but also some real practical, pragmatic advice in there. was that something that you were really keen in getting involved with and putting, making sure it was in the book?
The practical advice element of it.
Or just some of the goal setting and some of those areas which were more about strategies?
Yeah, so that kind of came back to the idea of musicians not really feeling equipped to do the job that they have to do. There was that element of including that, and also partly when I was doing my MSc and I found all this treasure trove of information about essentially how to become a better musician, you know, how to improve quicker with certain performance strategies, and how to be more confident on stage, and how to be very clear about what you want so that actually you can achieve it faster. You know, let's be clear about it. I found that process, that there was all this research and there were all these practical ways of actually doing that, just incredible. And something that really struck me was that when I was doing the MSc initially, was that there was all this information and all these tools and tips and strategies that just didn't get out to the musician population. And they'd be buried in a journal article, you know, with an appendix of this is what we actually did and we found it was incredibly effective. I just thought, well, how is this not getting out to the people who need it? So I think it was, I kind of saw this almost as a bridge as well between the strategies that research had suggested really, really work for musicians in various contexts, and actually trying to make it really accessible and really engaging so that nobody has to go onto Google Scholar and kind of go 20 pages down and then eventually find the specific thing that they're looking for. But yeah, I'm a big fan of, you know, moving the conversation on. We've had a lot of conversation about the mental health issues in the music industry, which is fantastic. And if you want to make meaningful change, obviously raising awareness is a huge part of that. But then we actually need to offer people strategies and actually signposting to the best organizations and things. And so for me, I mean, obviously the mental health topic is slightly different, but in terms of the health conversation overall, actually strategies, how to warm up your voice, how to prevent injury, you know, things like that. So it's not just, okay, these are the problems that you might face and leaving it there, but actually really giving people like a toolkit to manage their health and actually improve their performance themselves.
Yeah, and I think that was a really welcome aspect of it that I took from that, you know, working in the area as well. Being able to read about these different initiatives and strategies that have proved really useful from the clinical research out there. Excellent. I was also struck by the amount of information and insight from people giving their advice, and almost, you know, these gems of wisdom. And I wondered, for you, Lucy, any of them that really kind of stuck out for you as real kind of crucial pieces of information in that book?
I think as a vocal coach, I was particularly struck by some advice by Dane Chalfin, he's a vocal coach, but he's a vocal rehabilitation coach as well. And he gave us this quote by Machiavelli, which, bear with me. And it says, he who has not, hang on, I can't read. He who has not first laid his foundations may be able to, with great ability to lay them afterwards, but they will be laid with trouble to the architect and danger to the builder. So what Dane was essentially saying is that sums up 90% of my professional life, helping people to put foundations in after they're successful. But what he spoke about was how that is so difficult. And it's difficult for the coach who's working with the artist, it's difficult for the artist. And we had examples of artists like Paloma Faith saying, you know, she was really a very successful celebrity before she even started having coaching. And it was incredibly difficult. And she had quite a lot of issues by that stage. And it's much harder to sort those issues once they've actually come about, rather than having some sessions with a vocal coach to just check what you're doing. Are you, you know, is your technique sound? Are you susceptible to having issues? So it's, for me, that's what this book is all about. It's about laying the correct foundations. I knew that was going to happen at some stage.
Perfect timing.
Yeah. So it was about, the book was basically laying those foundations so that people can read about it, hopefully before any issues emerge.
Yeah, and I think that resonates both physically and psychologically. You know, working with musicians, I don't do too much physical stuff, but I think what you said there really resonates psychologically as well. Picking it up later down the line is a lot more troublesome generally than catching it. So yeah, excellent. What about you, Rhian? Was there any kind of key gems of wisdom that you took away from this?
There's loads of quotes in there that I love. I mean, Imogen Heap is kind of peppered throughout because she gave me a brilliant interview for the book. And one of the things that she was speaking about that I thought was really interesting and true was that you kind of define your own measure of success. I think especially for young musicians and, you know, musicians throughout their career, it can be really easy to get stuck on this idea that, I don't know, what you see on social media or media or what your peers are doing is something that you should strive to do, and that might be to do with fame or money or, you know, reaching a particular goal. But it's really important to, one, like, think about whether that will actually make you truly happy and fulfill you, and two, what's associated with reaching those goals. So you might want to be a superstar artist, but if you do reach that height, which, you know, as we point out in the book, very, very few people do, that's a really tough lifestyle, actually. It's a very public lifestyle. It's a very busy lifestyle. You've got a lot of pressure. You've got a lot of attention all the time. It's very tough to take time off. So, you know, do you really want that? Or do you actually want to, you know, have a family or go traveling or live a quieter life? She was kind of talking about how, okay, well, if you want to live in London, then, you know, you're going to have to work very hard for that because it's very expensive. And what are you prepared to do to, like, sacrifice what you're going to need to do to get there? And, you know, will there be things that you're missing out on? And that can apply to, like, lots of different examples. So I found that really interesting to come from her, especially, you know, from someone who is so successful and has such a diverse career, that's something that she's really thought a lot about, clearly. And I also, that we've got a great interview with a writer and producer and a musician called Catherine Ann Davies, who performs as the Anchoress, and she was talking about perfectionism. I think it's in the music performance anxiety chapter, where she was saying, you know, she would get so worried before a big gig about, like, fluffing a song and making a mistake. But then she saw Rufus Wainwright performing at the Royal Albert Hall, and he did fluff a song, but he just was honest about it and made a joke about it, and the audience loved him for it. And that's what she remembered about the gig, that was just the moment that he was human. And I think that's really interesting in terms of performance, because, you know, no one can be perfect, but also that pertains again to, like, lots of other aspects of a musician's and also just, like, people's lives. Like, we can't be perfect, we make mistakes, but the key is just to admit it and move on. So that was really interesting to me. And there's loads of stuff beyond that. Like, there's something that I've been thinking about recently, because it's kind of pertains to the book, which is we've sourced an interview with Ed Sheeran. He did one with Hay House, and it was published, like, just when we were at the tail end of, like, finishing all the editorial stuff. And I just listened to it and I was like, we've got to get some of these quotes in because they were just brilliant. And he was saying that, and this again pertains to success, he was like, you know, he's been obviously incredibly successful in his career. He's broken records. And when he did that record breaking tour, I don't think it was last year, it was the year before. Obviously it wasn't last year, but it was, I think, 2019. And he played 4 nights at Wembley Stadium, like, and everyone was like, oh, how do you feel? You know, you've broken all these records, you've reached, like, the highest heights. And he was like, I just felt nothing. Like, I felt more when I was playing to a gig in front of 10 people, because that was such a big learning experience for me. But I've done all the learning, and, you know, playing a gig is, I guess, kind of like easy-ish to him now. So playing to such a large crowd, it just doesn't feel like anything. And it's all about the journey and what it's taken you to get there. And me and Lucy were having this conversation earlier this week, like, you know, everyone's like, oh, how does it feel to publish a book? And obviously we feel very accomplished and we feel very proud, but it's also like, I don't know, it's not like this big, huge euphoric feeling where you're just feel so amazing because you've just done this thing, but it's more about the journey and the lessons that we learned along the way. And that again can also relate to, like, musicians' careers and life in general. Like, it's just a constant learning and adjusting process, rather than, like, you know, the goal to, like, reach some sort of destination that's going to make you happy and make all your dreams come true. It's just about like, what are you doing every day that's making you a better person and a better musician, like more happy, more successful in whatever terms that you've just find are the best terms for yourself.
Yeah, yeah. I hope you can find some space to celebrate your achievement in there somewhere.
Well, I'm having a drink now.
Yeah.
And now the books are actually here, it's a different matter. Like it was kind of academic, wasn't it, earlier in the week?
Yeah.
It was like, oh, it's going to be published this week. But then when I'm sure Rhian had the same experience. When I opened the box, it was just incredible to actually see it.
Yeah, it's amazing to hold it in our hands, like I said, and to be like, we made like all the decisions and we created this thing and we did all the writing and we went through all the stress and the pain and the tears and like the happiness, and then we created this our little like work baby, essentially. That's what it is for us now.
I guess it takes time for these things to kind of settle, don't they? All the achievements and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the reception been like so far, either of you?
Well, we were astonished that Universal, Warner's and Sony all placed significant pre-orders. And I think we have some people from those organisations on the call at the moment. So thank you so much to those guys for your support. And it just meant a huge amount right at the beginning, before we'd even sold any to the public. To have that kind of support was just fantastic. And we've also been in discussions with the BPI, which is the British Phonographic Industry, is it? They're the governing body for the British music industry, essentially. And they've been incredibly supportive, and they fund the Brits fund the Brit School. So we're going to get copies into the Brit School. And we've also had discussions with a prominent music college who would like to develop the content into a module for their students. And we've had a conversation with a really prominent record studio as well, who actually wants to put copies into the studios and have them on the front desk so that people can actually see them, and also if they're just having downtime they can flick through it. And I think one of the biggest challenges is actually getting information out to the musicians who need it. So hopefully if anyone on this call has any ideas, and if they want a copy to leave in a prominent position for musicians to see, please let us know. But I think the next step is really about us actually getting it out to the people who need it. And we've had some phenomenal pre-sales. So to anybody on the call who has pre-ordered, thank you very, very much, because again, it means a huge amount. And we have an amount of books ourselves that we are offering for quite a substantial discount, which we will be sending out ourselves. Once you get involved with things like Amazon and then our own personal distributor, we then only get about 25% of the book, and then we have to pay for the cost of creating it. So I think we worked out through Amazon, we're going to get something like 15p each. So if anybody does want to order the book and hasn't done already, please check out our website, soundadvicebook.com, and we've got all the links there, and then the promo codes are available through our social media, which you can find on the website.
Fantastic. I mean, I'm sure it will permeate slowly.
Yeah.
Where do you go on? Carry on. Did I cut you off?
No, I just said we hope so.
Yeah.
Oh, we hope so. Yeah, I was just wondering where, Lucy in particular, where do you see it moving now? You've written this book, and what do you imagine happening music industry wise, and the support for psychological health?
Well, I was thinking about this earlier, and I think we've had amazing initiatives spring up, obviously like Tonic Rider, for mental health. So Adam, I don't know if you want to just explain a bit about Tonic Rider.
Yeah, Tonic Rider, we have started a weekly peer group for people in the music industry. We were deliberating and planning and working out what to do, and we thought just somebody needs to get a hold of this and start some kind of facility. So weekly we'll be running these peer groups for musicians. You can find all the details Tonic Rider. You can Google it. I wish I had all the details to hand like you did. But yeah, it's something for musicians, people in the music industry. We're really working out what people want as we go along, but it was really important for us to actually just almost put the money where the mouth was and go, right, here's a holding facility for us all to come together and be heard and to talk about where we're at. And it's a work in process, but we've had a great uptake on that, and it's going to be moving faster and faster. I think musicians are going to be becoming involved with that as well.
Bless Geordie, he's put a link to Tonic Rider in the chat for anyone who wants to know about it. But I think initiatives like Tonic Rider are so needed, especially for the mental health support of musicians. And we've got brilliant support from charities like BAPAM, who offer physical health support. But I think our challenge is really about getting these things out to the people who need it, and actually being able to, as I said earlier, try and find different ways to get things out. So I really hope that we will be able to develop some strategic partnerships in order to do that, and actually disseminate the information in different ways. But I really hope that as an industry, as I mentioned before, we now move towards preventative action rather than just crisis management, which we've done for quite a long time. And so we'd love to, we want to be able to do that with music professionals, but also music students too. And I think actually being able to target students before they've actually become professional, before that workload has increased so significantly that it really starts causing problems, I think we have a real opportunity to actually try and prevent some of the historic problems that we've had in the industry, but actually by targeting young musicians.
There's definitely a sea change happening, isn't there, I think so.
Yeah, thankfully.
Yeah.
I'm just aware of the time. And do you think we should open this up to questions from people that might be watching?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
Or anything else you want to say?
Not really. Just like, thanks for listening, and please buy our book, and please tell all your friends and buy our book, and help us get the hopefully very helpful messages that we've got inside out there, and improve the music industry for the better.
So yeah, if anybody has any questions, please do post them in the chat. Or I think there's a Q&A section as well.
If not, I have questions while they're coming in.
Oh, there's a good one.
Yeah, what would you say are the top 5 health issues musicians face as a result of their career?
Shall I answer this one?
Yeah, go for it.
Yep. So the top 5, I think I can do 5. Musculoskeletal issues, so anything to do with the joints and pain with playing. Performance anxiety, for singers, vocal health, hearing issues. There's one that I can't think of off the top of my head, but obviously then general mental and physical health issues. Rhian, is there one really obvious one that I've forgotten?
I zoned out then, sorry. Can you recap and then I'll have a think?
That's okay. I was just saying musculoskeletal issues, hearing problems, vocal health issues for singers, and then general mental and physical health issues across the board. They say performance anxiety.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of falls under general mental health, doesn't it? So yeah, I mean, there's obviously a lot of stuff under mental health, and other stuff under physical health that will affect you depending on the sort of job that you're doing, and whether you're a touring artist or not, for example, what kind of instrument you play, whether you're a singer or not, and whether you're a producer and you're working at a desk, that obviously comes with some potential physical problems too. So yeah, it's quite hard to boil it down to 5 because there's just a lot of stuff that affects people differently, but I'd say that you've got that covered under the 5 that you mentioned there.
A question has come in there I've seen from Rhian also about saying, what are the most important areas to prioritize? You've named 5 there. I wonder if you could encapsulate 1 or 2, or is that difficult to try and do?
Yeah, just to say that's actually come from Finola, who is she's a contributor in the hearing chapter. So just a huge thank you to Finola for all her support. And Finola very kindly said that she's going to make sure that the book is in the UCL library. So we're incredibly grateful for that. Thank you, Finola. I think, as I mentioned, that we have taken quite a lot of structures and frameworks of support from classical music research. I would really like to, and this is obviously something I'm looking at in my PhD, But what I'm quite passionate about is actually testing methods of support in a scientific way with the popular music community, those who don't work in classical music. So when I say pop, I do mean kind of that's quite a broad term. It's not just people who are playing in the top 40. In academic terms, popular music is anything that is not Western classical or folk music. So that is incredibly broad. So I'd like to see support systems tested properly, scientifically, but also we need to look at how some specific issues affect those working in pop more specifically. So for example, a lot of the research we have is about performance anxiety in classical musicians, but not in pop musicians. So I think we need a whole body of work that is actually going to take the work that has been done in classical and try and apply it to other musicians and make sure that the support we offer is the correct support. I hope that makes sense.
There's another question there from your research. How have artists who spend a lot of time on the tour come back to reality when not on the road?
Rhian, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, so I think that can be a really tough thing. And, you know, one of the quotes that we've got in the book is from a tour manager called Susie Green, who was talking about how vital it is that there's almost like a post-touring rehab where you kind of go in a dark room and watch Netflix and just don't really interact with anyone for as long as you need to, because that transition is really tough. And she also talks about the importance of having adequate time off between tours, because you need to transition back into that different life. It's a totally different life. And, you know, it can bring about relationship issues if you haven't seen your partner for ages, and, you know, identity issues because you're suddenly going from one stage to having to just do normal everyday stuff that can be boring. So there are a lot of problems with that. And in terms of how people do it, I think like the only answer is being aware that it's going to be tough and giving yourself a lot of time to adjust and knowing what it is that you can do to make it a bit easier on yourself, whether that's, you know, having lots of time by yourself, or, you know, spending lots of time with loved ones, or, you know, going out for walks, or keeping a kind of healthy daily structure. Like, again, to kind of bring up Ed Sheeran, like something also that was quite interesting from that Hay House interview that we included in the book is that after he did that Crazy Divide tour, he came home and he was like, I don't really know what to do with myself. So for a year, he like set himself a goal of, or no, it wasn't for a year, I think it was for a month, of painting a painting every day. So that was his like new goal. And he did it. And then after that, he had like a really strict daily structure that was the same as like, you know, a 9 to 5. So he would get up at a certain time, he'd go for a run, he'd like have breakfast, he'd go to the studio, and he'd work until 5 o'clock, like a normal working day. So I think structure can be really important as well.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear his subjective take on that. I guess most people are going to find their own way of regulating when they come back from tours. Yeah. Maybe there's one more question here we can look at, which is asking more specifically about the mental health side of stuff. What are the top mental health issues?
Yeah, Adam, feel free to answer that if you would like. I think you're probably best placed here to answer that.
Who, me? Okay, well, I think it's subjective. You know, I think generally, you know, the big headlines that we'll hear about is depression and anxiety, but that plays out differently. You know, you'll have your own anxiety, your own depression, and I think it's being reflective about what that means for you. And also kind of there you mentioned about, you know, drug addiction, and I tend to see anything that we're using to fix how we feel outside ourselves as a compulsion. And sometimes it works for a while, then it doesn't. So it's a very difficult question to answer, I think, in terms of what are the big headlines in those areas. But I would say, you know, anxiety, I would say compulsive use of substance or whatever that is, because it's to do with the adrenaline, isn't it, coming off the road. Generally, our bodies are primed and prepped. So 10 p.m. every night, we're going to be elevated. And then the body is very habitual, so it gets used to that. So it needs some way of managing such things. But it can manifest in all different guises, I think, psychologically.
Yeah, and some of the things we cover in the book, and we've got a whole chapter on substance misuse and addiction, and we've also got a whole chapter on disordered eating and body image. And then, you know, like Lucy said, also we have a whole mental health chapter, and that covers things like anxiety and depression, and, you know, what Adam, as well as another psychotherapist called Tamsin Embleton, see as the most common mental health issues in the patients that they work with. And then later on, there's kind of anecdotal quotes from various musicians that we interviewed about the sorts of things that they suffer with. But, you know, like Adam said, it's such an individual experience.
Yeah, I guess one last question, if we have time for this, which is, any plans to create a longer term hub platform that could be regularly updated?
Yeah, I mean, this was like one of the visions that we had, wasn't it, to create like a sort of news and resource website that brought all the health and music related news together. That can be interviews, news stories, you know, updates on the resources that are available, as well as like a resources section, which included a lot of stuff that we've got in the book, but perhaps in different forms, like video and audio and some articles too. I mean, it's a lovely idea. It's a lot of work, and we might need to raise some funding if we want to do that. That's definitely something for a bit longer in the future, when me and Lucy have had a bit of a break. But I would love to do that. It's a whole other project, and yeah, it's something I think we'd have to get quite a lot of support for.
I think we're open to all kinds of ways of getting that information out, aren't we, Rhian? And we were talking about this earlier. Yeah, after our much needed break. But I think that would be a wonderful thing. But I think it will also be about, maybe from here on out, actually about developing partnerships and strategic partnerships within the industry, with people who are happy to work with us to actually disseminate the information. Because I think the idea of us actually creating that website from scratch is slightly terrifying at the moment. But
we just need some developers. We just need some money and some developers. That's what we need.
Yeah.
And a lot of time.
A lot more time. And we also have hopes to publish an international edition in the future as well. So we've had some interest from America, and so we're looking to obviously keep the core bulk of the text and the information, but actually make sure that it's specific with American organizations that obviously American readers will be able to access. So there's quite a lot in the pipeline already. But we're incredibly grateful, and yeah, what a journey this has been.
Yeah, I mean, there's one more question that's come up, but I think regarding time-wise, there's one last question I'd like to ask, maybe both of you really. Maybe slightly on the periphery of the whole journey you've been on, but how has it changed you independently?
That's a great question.
This whole book. Yeah.
Such a good question.
I need a drink before I say that. Personally, I have had an incredibly difficult time with my health over the last couple of years, and it has definitely felt superhuman at times, being able to actually write and produce the work. How has it changed? I honestly cannot believe that we did it. And I'm not talking about Rhian, because Rhian's a professional writer. I never had any doubt that she would do it. But I've had a lot of hospital admissions and regular unmanaged seizures that have made this process incredibly challenging. And I cannot believe that it has happened. So, I mean, this maybe sounds a little strange, but I'm just so proud that I did it, and it's given me immense confidence for the future, for projects that I just don't even think I can do, that you can. But I would also credit Rhian with that, because Rhian has been the most incredible co-author, and she's been so supportive and so patient when I've been having difficult times, and she's taken the helm during that period. So I really would not have done this book without Rhian's support. So I just have to say a huge thank you to her.
Yeah, thank you, Lucy. And, you know, likewise, I could never have done it without you, definitely without all the health expertise that you brought, which is one of the reasons why I was always very happy to be patient, because we needed you on this project. In terms of how it's changed me, I mean, I think I'm definitely more, and maybe this is a journey that I would have gone on myself if I hadn't written the book, but it must have had an influence. I'm definitely more mindful of my own health, and I definitely know myself a bit better. And I just feel like I feel so much more confident, I think, because we created something from nothing. Like, we literally had an idea and we've created this thing, and we raised the money and we got it done, like sometimes against all odds. So that's given me a massive confidence boost. And I think also kind of tied into that is that it's like I'm writing about things right now that I'm like extremely passionate about, and I've just reached this like wonderful point in my career where like I'm earning money from just writing about things that I find fascinating, and that's like a real gift. And doing the book is a huge part of that, because it's obviously given me so much knowledge in the health world, which is something that I'm really drawn to in a music business context. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and I hope to write more in that area. Like, I'm writing an article right now for a broadsheet about the prevalence of eating disorders in the music industry, and that's a fascinating subject to me that I think is really important to shine a light on. So things like that just really fulfill me. And yeah, so it's improved my career, and I hope it only will continue to do so. And it's given me a confidence boost, and it's also kind of made me take my own health more seriously, I think, all of which are wonderful things.
Fantastic. A great achievement overall for everyone, I think.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll bring it to close. Just want to thank everybody for coming, representing, buying the book, supporting all the people that you've mentioned. I probably don't know, they're part of your kind of crowd. Is there anything you want to add before we bring it to a close?
I'd just love to say a few final thank yous. Obviously, as I've mentioned before, this was an incredibly challenging project. So just a huge thank you to Roddy and my parents, who have been so supportive throughout all of this, and to everybody who has, there are people on the call who have contributed, who have shared. Just the support from the professional networks has just been really quite humbling. So thank you so much to everybody who has supported this project, and we are incredibly grateful.
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo what Lucy said. Really, we've got a lot of acknowledgements in the back of the book, because, you know, this was not a project that was done by just Lucy and I. There was a lot of people who supported us, encouraged us, read chapters, gave us advice. And yeah, like we say at the beginning of that section, this book is the work of many hands, and I'm grateful to all of them.
Great.